Do you have scraps that you just couldn't let go of? You've piling up in your craft room? Hi, I'm Jess from JessCrafts.com, and I'm here to help you make the most of your crafty supplies and time. So today I want to show you how I would use one of these types of scraps. I think that while this is kind of a specific idea, you can pull it into a lot of other of these larger scraps, particularly if you find yourself with die cutting scraps, because I'm like, this should be just garbage, but it's too cool to turn into garbage. And many of you agreed with me on Instagram. So I'm going to pull in my liquid glue because that's going to be easiest for gluing something down like this. And I'm also, beforehand, I'm going to think about where about on this scrap do I want to use. My yellow solid piece of cardstock behind this is the size of an A2 size card. So 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And you can make it for whatever size card base works for your scrap. And basically this is going to give it a kind of embossing look. So, embossing actually just presses it into the paper, but just layering the die cut gives it an embossing look. And I'm going to partly do this cutting so that I know where to really get some details of glue around the edge. And then a fine tip glue bottle works great for this. I have my Barely Art glue. I had to recently clean the cap because if you don't give it a clean with some warm water every once in a while, it really gets to clog up in these fine tip caps. And I keep a pin in it. I keep it resting in my Make It by Marco glue lounger. That's what this is. And it keeps the glue down at the tip of the bottle and always ready to go. I'm never kind of trying to shake the glue down or anything like that because that puts air bubbles in it and stuff too, which you really don't want to be doing. You don't want to be shaking your glue or any of your like Nuvo Drops, Scrapbook.com, Pops of Color. None of these things do you really want to be shaking. You can, if you're trying to loosen them up or something, move them around in your hands like this. Not really relevant for glue. But this fine tip is also going to help me to get into all these nooks and crannies. I got to work quick though because I don't want where I started to dry before I get to where I'm ending, which is already happening. Now, if you know you're going to use this scrap ahead of time, you could probably just cover it completely in double-sided tape, which would then make adhering your letters easier. And then, you'd have like no excuse for not just using this right away if this was all covered in adhesive. I like the double-sided from scrapbook.com. It is really secure. Okay, and then we'll place this down. We're going to want to place something heavy on top of it to keep that constant contact there. And I have a custom paperweight I ordered off of Etsy. It says Paper Buster in JessCrafts.com. And that is because, if you've not found my channel before now, I don't like making scraps. And I often don't have a lot of scraps because I share pattern paper templates that cut the pattern paper and make it into like A2, 5x7 slimline, all kinds of cards and all kinds of pattern paper into cards without leaving any pattern paper scraps. My idea for this was to take the letter and use that as the jumping off point for my sentiment. So because I had die cut a bunch of A's, I'm going to use the sentiment awesome, and I'll add you're awesome on top of it as well. I am going to glue 2 of these together. I think that it just adds a nice bit of dimension to have more than one layer of cardstock. This is really thick, high quality Simon Says stamp cardstock, so I think that one layer would be totally fine. It's just a personal preference. Makes it a little bit easier to work with on the card too. I have a tendency to bend one of them accidentally, and then I'll put that one on the bottom. What kind of scraps do you find really hard to let go? Let me know in the comments because I actually am pretty okay usually with throwing out those die cut leftovers and remains, but I could tell from posting it in a reel. I posted the H one and people were like, no, I would definitely keep that. Like so many people. So I kind of wonder what other scraps, like I'm probably thinking like if you were making some kind of ink blended background and you had a little bit of extra you cut off, that would be hard to get rid of. And then I have a cardstock, like what to do with cardstock scraps that you could really use for pattern paper. And it's mostly focusing on like strips. So if you have a lot of strips of scraps, that might be the video for you if you don't have these large panels of scrap. I know that sounds kind of weird to say that it's scrap because it's so big, but it really is something that is meant to be thrown out. Oh, I wanted to make that a little bit more towards the bottom instead of the top. So I wanted to be like more space for the your. Hopefully this will work. I think I can squeeze it in there, but then I'm gonna probably trim off some of this bottom to make things a little bit more even. I did find that to keep this card interesting, having a little bit of stamping and a little bit of die cutting combined on this set of cards was what I liked, and I liked to have the stamping and everything like all in this sort of monochromatic with the addition of the white strip. So I'm gonna trim this off and start putting our card completely together. I like to keep my paper upside down when I'm trimming off the edges like this, but you could also take your paper trimmer. I think in general, scissors and paper trimmer both work just fine for this. I think sometimes when I do my paper trimmer, I'm gonna get a much more even cut, but there is a challenge of trying to line it up straight, because normally I would take one of the flat edges and bump that up against the top of my paper cutter. So I always have to kind of trim one edge and then I can go around and get the rest of them. Hopefully that makes sense. I can, why don't I just demonstrate? I have the paper trimmer right here. So if I were to say want to chop off this edge, if I put this at the top, this is not necessarily perfectly straight. And that's what I'm kind of depending on to line up my side. So instead, I'm either going to have to visually make sure that my edges are there, which is totally possible, or I'm gonna wait till one of my sides is trimmed with a scissor. And even then, it can still be a bit of an issue because as you can see, that side is flapping up, but that's gonna give me a more precise, really smooth edge. You are gonna also want to come in and see if there's any areas that I didn't get enough glue that are sort of flapping up, particularly the little spaces between letters. Once I have it on my card base and everything's sort of evened and trimmed out, I'm ready to add my sentiment because I am having a whole series of little errors today. I kind of cut it a little too close at the bottom, but you probably wouldn't even have thought that if I hadn't pointed it out. And then I'll be able to adhere that down. The yellow on yellow is very subtle and probably not for everyone, but overall I really like how this series of cards turned out. And I like that I was able to take that scrap and make a really kind of complicated looking element in the background. Like I could see it very like wanting to intentionally make this background, but it was just that having that opportunity, that like eye for what makes a good scrap, that made it possible without all that extra work. If you found this video helpful, here's another video where you can find more ideas for enjoying your crafty time and supplies. Let me know you like this video with a share to your crafty community. Subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss the next template or tutorial, and check the video description for product links. See you in the next video.